And the next session is with Jeff. Jeff, how are you? What's going on? Are you
Good
with
afternoon. I'm well. How are you doing?
All good over here. We see we are running a little bit intense. No time for breaks, but I hope, since we are all remote here and a virtual organization and virtual or event, everyone has a chance to get a cup of coffee or a glass of water.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. I've been enjoying listening to the talks so far this afternoon. It's been wonderful. So many great ideas, so many great experiences that folks are sharing. I hope I can keep that trend going. And I will do my best to try and get everyone back on track a little bit from timing. So maybe I'll just speed things up a little bit. But lots of time for questions and answers, and hopefully I don't run too long.
All right. So folks, don't forget to switch the session in a Huba platform to make sure you are on the right session and you're asking questions in the right session, because otherwise we don't see those questions. And if we don't see them, we simply cannot answer. All right, Jeff, I will skip the introduction. You were also brief in writing about yourself, Agile Coach, management consultant, trainer, all sorts of organizations and industries. I just suggest you take it away. The stage is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to share a screen and fingers crossed this works. Maybe we can make sure.
It does.
Are you seeing, which screen are you seeing?
I'm seeing hi.
Hi. Hey, that's right. That's exactly what you're supposed to see. That's wonderful. So hi, everyone. I'm Jeff. This is me. This is what I look like. I'm from Canada. Way over here in Canada. Specifically, I live in a town called Whitby. It's about an hour east of Toronto. Really looking forward to sharing something with you about leadership, and specifically the idea of host leadership. Before I talk about host leadership, though, I want to talk about what we think of when we think of great leaders. When we think of great leaders, certain people come to mind. Often it's somebody like this guy. We can think of these leaders as our heroes. Leaders like Napoleon will evoke emotions of excitement. We're going to win, defeat our enemy, vanquish our foe, go on some sort of great adventure. Sometimes they evoke an emotion of nervousness. We have a desire to be as great as they are. It's going to be tough for us to be our best sometimes when we put that pressure on ourselves. Sometimes these sorts of leaders will evoke an emotion of terror. That is, if we don't do our part, if we don't come through, the leader's going to punish us in some way. There are leaders like this who embody many of the same characteristics and attributes of nervousness, excitement, and even terror who have made a huge impact in our world today. It's not just people from the past, but even today, there are people that have this aura about them. Now, there's another type of leader. This is Robert Greenleaf, and he wrote an essay in 1970 where he coined the term servant leadership. This essay contains a whole bunch of words, but I'm going to summarize it as this. Good leaders must first become good servants. And the idea is that between a hero leader and a servant leader is that the servant leader is a servant first. It begins with a natural desire to serve others. And only then do we make a conscious choice to aspire to lead. That's a very different take on leadership between our servant leader and our hero leader. Traditionally, leaders, the people in the center of this picture, in the brown part of this picture, the leaders in the center, they're the ones deciding what to do. They're directing the people on the outer ring. And this really is our hero leadership culture. They're the ones deciding bonuses in a traditional performance management system. They're the ones determining promotions. These leaders are following the management playbook that comes out of the Industrial Revolution. And it's the foundation of how most companies that have been around for any period of time operate. But the idea of servant leadership instead is that the leaders in the center serve the people on the outer ring. In this model, it's the people closest to the work, closest to the customers, closest to the information that are making the decisions. The leaders in this line of thinking embody the idea of serving others first. So we've got hero leadership and we've got servant leadership, but there's another type of leadership that I stumbled upon about 6 or 7 years ago. And funny enough, Doc Norton, who's speaking in one of the other tracks at this exact moment, is the one who introduced me to this. And I've done some work on it, and that's the idea of hero leadership. Let me introduce you to somebody. This is Leah Chase. Leah Chase is an American, not Canadian. She's an American, and she was known as the queen of Creole cuisine. I love Creole cuisine from the southern United States. She was the executive chef and the co-owner of a restaurant called Dookie Chase's Restaurant. And in addition to being known for her legendary Creole cuisine, she was very active in the civil rights movement in the United States. Now, with this very brief description I've given you and this great photo of her, what sort of feeling do you get from her? It's probably different from what you feel when you think about our hero leaders. It's unlikely you're feeling nervousness or terror of any kind. And even with this brief introduction, you may feel a sense of comfort, a sense of welcome, a sense of belonging, and maybe even a sense of joy. Leah is a type of architect of a different sort of leader. She embodies the idea of a host leader. We're going to explore what exactly host leadership is about today. Now, before I get into host leadership, I want to make something explicit. I'm sure this is obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. Leading requires at least two people. You can't be a leader without having someone else who's willing to be led or a follower. So leading isn't a role. Leading is actually a relationship. And that relationship manifests itself through interactions between two or more people. Our hero leaders and our host leaders build those relationships very, very differently. Let's look at the rules of being a great host leader. Many of us like rules. After all, rules make life simple. Do this and you'll succeed or you'll thrive. Do this other thing and you'll be doomed. Rules are simple. Rules are tempting. And almost always, rules are wrong. Life is more complicated than following a set of rules. And so when we look around and see what great hosts do, we find that they don't act in terms of rules. They act in terms of roles. Now, it's only one letter difference, but it's a huge difference in the value proposition. A role is something that you take on when it's needed. And we all have many roles in life. Sometimes we're a parent. Sometimes we're a basketball coach. Not me, but other people are basketball coaches. Sometimes we're a spouse, a friend, and so on. We do all of these things, but not equally and not all the time. And host leaders take on different roles. As we move away from Industrial Revolution thinking, that is the idea of Theory X thinking, Taylorism approaches to management and leadership, we can begin to explore how leadership today is about relationships rather than transactions. Today, in our modern world, leaders engage with people around solving wicked problems. We do it in a fast, emerging, volatile, changing environment where outcomes are often uncertain based on the actions that we take. And the idea of a host leader is that it's a metaphor based on roles, knowing when to step forward, when to step back. And hopefully with this metaphor, we'll realize that there isn't a checklist of do this and you'll be successful and don't do that and you'll fail, but rather just here are some patterns that may help when applied in the right context. I'll share some examples as we go through that. So let's explore this metaphor. We're going to start with the metaphor with talking about hosting a party or an event. Now, there are many things that need to be done to create an environment for a party or an event to be successful. They include things like setting up the environment, setting up a great environment, bringing people together, deciding who does and who doesn't get invited, creating a physical environment so that everyone can have a good time, introducing guests to each other, and yes, sometimes setting the rules or boundaries. When we look at this metaphor, we're going to see we can apply this to leadership through 6 roles and 4 positions. Let me start with the roles first. The first role that we have is the role of the initiator. Now, very rarely do we initiate something entirely on our own out of thin air. There's almost always a call to action or a call to adventure of some kind. It can take the form of an interest, a dissatisfaction, a passion, a rage, an injustice, or just wanting to see if things can be done differently. When we get upset about something, it may be a call to initiate something. You know, when I was acting as a scrum master for a team, this is roughly 8 years ago, one person on the team came to me because the meetings that we were having were interfering with his work. We would have our sprint review on Wednesday afternoon, our retrospective Thursday morning, and our sprint planning meeting Thursday afternoon. Because of this, he wasn't able to get any work done for that day and a half. He was so disrupted by meetings all the time. It was preventing him from getting in the flow of work. And so that was enough for him to initiate a conversation with me and the rest of the team to say, could we change our meeting times so that I can get into the flow of doing work? That was him initiating something. So when we think about the initiator role, we're imagining a place where we want something to be different and we're prepared to do something about it right now. Now, often as an initiator, we realize that the thing that we're asking for, the destination that we want to get to, might be too big to achieve in a single step. So we'll often break things down into manageable steps. Well, we may have that end state in mind. We know that we're not going to get there tomorrow, so we'll be focused on just maybe making that first step in moving us towards that. And because the world continues to change, what might have been a great idea 2 years ago may no longer be a great idea today. So even at this point, when we have an idea of what our current thinking on an end state might be, we know we're only going to focus on taking that first step to nudge ourselves in that direction. In order to do this, we need to know not only what our end state is and what that next step is going to be, but we need to understand our current condition, the where we are today. Then we can think about as a team what that next step is going to be. Then we can reevaluate where we are at that point and determine the next safe step to take. So the initiator is really about getting things moving, about taking that first step, moving in a useful, productive direction. We're not going to make detailed plans years out necessarily right now, but we're just focused on getting things moving, which we hope will engage others. If we decide to proceed, we're going to need to continually be aware of what's emerging, what we're seeing happen, so that we can take a breath, pause and reflect, and think about the next step. And that's the initiator. They're going to get things started. Then we've got the inviter. The inviter is the person who's going to invite others to come along and participate on something that we or somebody else has initiated. We don't have to be the initiator to be the inviter. The inviter is very different from traditional management, if you think about this. In traditional management, people are told what they're going to work on and who's going to be on their team. Instead, the inviter invites others to come along. And an inviter includes 3 specific elements. First, it includes an acknowledgement. Then it includes an attraction. And third, a choice. Let me explain those first. The acknowledgement describes what I value about you and why I'd like you to be part of this team, part of this journey that I think we're going to go on. It's a compliment. It's me saying, I value you and I want you to be a part of this thing. You're the right person. You have the right skills, the right experience, the right expertise, and the right attitude. Your involvement is going to make this thing better. An invitation also needs to be attractive. What's in it for you? What's the project? What are our hopes, our intentions? What's our vision? What are we hoping to get out of this? So I need to be able to articulate what makes it attractive to you. And in order for it to be an invitation, and this is important, in order for me to be able to get a heartfelt yes, there has to be a real possibility that you could say no to me. That's an invitation. There has to be a choice. If there is no possibility of you saying no, then it really isn't an invitation. It's an order masquerading as an invitation. You have to be able to say no for it to be an invitation. The inviter doesn't need to be the same person as the initiator. You can imagine multiple people playing different roles at different times. But now that we've initiated something, we've invited people, the next role that we're going to talk about is the space creator. Now, there's so much that's obvious about creating a welcoming, safe space, even during the last 18 months where we've been living in these virtual spaces. Think about the space you create when you invite people over to your home. Think about the space you create when you choose to go to a restaurant, a club, or any other outing. The space has a direct impact on your experience and the experience of those who come along with you. Do we include familiar features with nothing out of the ordinary, or do we introduce some new elements into our space? If we're meeting in a physical space, how do we lay out the chairs? Do we create any subconscious messages by having a front of the room and a back of the room? Or maybe we have a circle and we have an inner circle and an outer circle. How are we going to greet people when they arrive? Are we going to have music playing when people arrive? Will different music have different impacts? You know, I was working with a team a couple of years ago, and we were in a bit of a rut. And so at our next retrospective, I realized that we needed to do something different. We needed to shake it up. So rather than go through the regular routine in our regular breakout meeting room that we had, I bought everyone coffee or tea, and I took them all out to a local park for a couple of hours. Just doing something new like that was enough to break us out of the complacency, to break us out of our routine. And it sparked all sorts of new conversations. And that was me playing the role of the space creator. By creating a new space, I was able to spark different conversations and get people out of that routine. We often take our spaces for granted. We can't always set the stage for whatever happens, but we can create a space where that's more likely to happen. We also need to nurture and protect that space. And that's a key role in helping us nurture and protect that space is another role that we take as a host leader, and that's the idea of a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is one where as a host, we're focused on the crossing of thresholds. That is the boundary of the space that we've created. Imagine a situation, if you will. Just go with me for a second. Imagine you've invited 4 close personal friends over for dinner. You've initiated the event. You've explained the purpose. You've extended invitations. You've created a space for those friends. And then one of them shows up with a new special friend that they've recently met. They didn't check with you ahead of time about this. They've just shown up. Yeah, it would have been really nice if that friend told you about this person ahead of time to make sure it was okay. So what do you do if they didn't? Do you invite that other person in? Well, there are 3 options, really. You can invite that person in, acknowledging the contribution that they want to make to the event going on. You invite them in with enthusiasm. We're thrilled that you're here. It's so great to meet you. You might also say, no, I'm not going to let you in. And that's really difficult, especially in a social setting. Often it requires us to be explicit about the reason that we're not inviting that person in. It's often really helpful for the ongoing relationship to be able to genuinely think about it and make sure that people understand why you're saying no. And the third option is maybe. And this is offering an alternative solution or an action or another possibility. Often when I'm coaching or consulting in companies, people will find that I'm hosting a retrospective for a team. More often than not, someone will show up and they say, Jeff, I hear you're doing a retrospective for a team. Would it be okay if I sat in just to listen and observe? I won't participate. I'll be quiet and stay in the corner. I want to see how you facilitate a retrospective. Should I let them in? In that moment, I'm a gatekeeper. I've done something that's really worked for me in those situations. And first of all, I absolutely do not let them in. I tell them that if they want to come in, I'll ask the team. And if the team unanimously agrees, I'll extend an invitation to the next retrospective, but never this one. Why? Well, that immediate need of being able to invite them in puts undue pressure on the people, the team who are participating in the retro to say yes. They don't want to say no. It's happening right now and they want to say yes. They want to build those relationships. So I don't even take it to the team, but I extend an alternative possibility for them. Instead of inviting them in, I'll offer to run a retro for them and their team. It's worked really well for me. Now, I hope you noticed something. Well, I've closed the gate for someone wanting to attend another team's retrospective. I've opened a gate by making the offer to host a retro for that other person's team. In my experience, once I make that offer, they almost never bring up the idea of observing another team's retro again. Sometimes the gatekeeper isn't just about letting people in. Sometimes it's about helping keep events on track. A couple of months ago, actually, I was hosting a conversation with a group where we were going through a really tough, challenging situation that the team was dealing with. And at one point in the meeting, someone said, yeah, and on top of that, this other thing is also a problem. And before we knew it, a discussion had started about this other important but unrelated topic. As the gatekeeper, I interrupted. I forget exactly what I said, but it was something like, this sounds like a different topic than we got together to discuss today. It does sound important. Is it more important than the reason we got together today? And after a moment, everyone sort of looked around and no, we realized that the original topic was the most important thing for us to talk about. And it refocused back on the original agenda of the meeting. It's certainly a critical role for a host to play, especially in a work environment. Now, sometimes it's not about creating the space. Sometimes it's about knowing who's in the meeting or who's at the party. So when we talk about the gatekeeper, we're talking about welcoming people, connecting people with the environment and space. But as a connector, we're not focused on the connection with the environment. As a connector, we're focused on the connections between people and ideas. Host leaders can create the possibility of something emerging that may not have happened without the connector being present. Now, as a personality trait, hosts who are playing connectors aren't interesting. They're interested. That's a weird thing to say. Connectors aren't interesting. It's not about them. They're interested in others. We've all come across people who are interesting. They tend to be the center of attention, a bit like I am at the moment. You are on the call listening to me. I'm the center of attention. Hopefully, I'm somewhat interesting. But when we take on the role of a host leader, specifically in the connector role, it's about creating a place for others to shine and for others to be great. Earlier this year, a gentleman I used to coach reached out to me to get my advice on something. He was having trouble with something and he thought I could help. I probably could have, but I saw an opportunity to connect him with another friend of mine who has extensive experience in and depth in what it was he was looking for. So I took on the role of the connector. I made the introductions. I made the connection. I introduced the two of them to each other. It ended up working out really well. So this can be a really critical role for managers in an agile environment. Being aware of other initiatives and work going on in an organization allows people to make connections. In fact, a few years ago, I was working at a company and I was coaching a variety of teams in a variety of departments in a variety of lines of business. Because of this, I actually stumbled upon two teams in two departments in two different lines of business actually working on a similar problem. Can you imagine that? Two teams, different departments, different lines of business, different managers, different executives that they reported in through, effectively working on the same customer problem. And neither one knew about the other. Even their managers didn't know about the other work that was going on. So in addition to making the connection and getting them to work together, which was important, what was more important was that I worked with the leaders, the executives of that organization, to create a lightweight way for the managers to be able to see and make these sorts of connections on their own in a sustainable and ongoing way. I was able to help create an environment where these connections could happen on purpose rather than me stumbling across it. So when we're talking about the role of a connector, we're interested in others. We're interested in listening to others. We're in tune with the problems, opportunities, topics that others are dealing with. We begin to develop an understanding of specific skills that other people have, what expertise other groups and other people have. And we keep that information filed away until we have an opportunity to leverage it by making some sort of connection. We develop and cultivate the relationships to expand beyond the individual teams, the individual people. We can do this within a specific space, but these can happen in our daily interactions and can be critical roles regardless of the position that we find ourselves in within the organization. Great reminder for managers on our teams, in our organizations. And now this brings us to our final role of a host, the idea of a co-participant. Now, this is obvious when you think about it in social settings. If we invite guests over for dinner, we expect our host to sit at the table and eat with us. It would be really strange to invite people over to our house, to our home, and then we go hide in the kitchen while our guests eat dinner. There's an etiquette in this setting, and that's that the host serves their guests first. If there's a little bit smaller food left over towards the end, the host maybe gets a slightly smaller portion. For example, if somebody shows up with a special friend that you hadn't counted on, maybe you didn't prepare enough food for that extra person, so you as the host take a little bit less. In leadership terms, it often doesn't seem so clear, but let me give you an example. Earlier this year in Canada, one of our national airlines got themselves in a little bit of trouble. Because of the pandemic, travel is incredibly low. It still is in Canada. And this airline, because they were struggling financially, they benefited from government, which means taxpayer money, to make up for the millions of dollars in lost travel revenue. The media attention that they received and the flack that they took was because that the airline announced over $10 million was being paid out in bonuses and special stock options to their senior executives. At the same time, this airline was laying off over 25,000 employees. They were also refusing to refund passengers whose flights were canceled because of COVID-19 travel restrictions. The executives at this airline were not acting like hosts. They were not making sure that their guests, their employees in this case, were taken care of first. They were looking after themselves and only themselves. That's not being a good host. That's not being a good leader. And in my humble opinion, that's not being a good human being. But let me jump back into the party example. I think of one of the reasons that parties often congregate in a kitchen is because guests want to be with their host. We want to be with the people that have invited us over, and not often a different room. Sometimes, if you're at a party where the action is in the kitchen, it's likely that the host will usher you into another room at some point. The host needs to actually prepare some food or do something in the kitchen, and everyone's in the way. And when that happens, there's almost always a lull or awkward silence in the conversation. Something is missing, and that something is the host, who is co-participating most of the time. In my experience, the best managers and leaders adopt an approach that we all have a role to play, but that I, as the manager or leader, am no better than anyone else on the team. It's an approach rooted in humility. It requires vulnerability. It can be really tough for a manager to say, I don't know, but let's figure it out together. Through all of the previous steps I've talked about, we're creating an environment that allows others to be great. It's not about us. And at this point, we're participating alongside everyone else in an equal in every way. Host leaders serve each other first. They take turns along everyone else, and they provide care and support. But ultimately, a host leader eats the same food as their guests. 6 roles: the initiator, who forms a hope, a dream, an idea, and it makes that first step possible, or creates the idea of that first step. The inviter, who thinks about who can take that first step. They invite them with a real possibility of getting no as an answer. The space creator, who looks to create a safe, inspiring, and welcoming environment. The gatekeeper, who welcomes people in, helps keep things on track, helps you know where to hang your jacket, where the washrooms are. The connector, who is always on the lookout to build or strengthen connections and relationships between people and ideas. And the co-participant, who's there serving others first, joins in an equal of all the events, and of course, eats the same food. Now, there are different places that we take on these roles. So let's look at these relatively quickly. I mentioned that there were 4 positions, and there are. The first one is the position of being on the stage. This is when we're in the spotlight. It's very much the public facing of being a host leader. It's where the action is, and you are at the center of it. It's about standing with confidence, owning the space, and having presence. Attributes that often make leaders in this position successful tend to be when they're real and authentic, in my experience. It supports building the trust and confidence that people have with them. It inspires people, but it's not where everyone shines, and that's okay. Now, in my experience, there are 2 times that leaders really struggle in this space. The first is when they're not prepared. And often this looks like leaders floundering in this space. Too many times I see leaders in this that end up reverting to, because I'm the manager, so do what I'm told. I do what I told you. I'm the leader. I'm in charge. And that doesn't foster a great environment for anyone. The second is much more subtle when I see leaders fail or struggle in this space. And it's when the leader has already predetermined a plan of action, and they're trying to get everybody on board. Words like, let's get everyone on board. Let's get drive alignment. I need everybody to step up. Those are really dangerous words. That's not an approach that a host leader takes. Those are really words that come out of our Industrial Revolution Management playbook, and they're really a form of coercion. They're not inviting people to participate. They're forcing people to participate using different words. So often, great host leaders will have thought about their message. They'll think explicitly about what they're going to say when they're on the stage, but they'll also think explicitly about stepping off the stage. They'll provide the direction, provide intent, and then allow the party or meeting or project to unfold with the combined wisdom, experience, expertise of the people who are on the team or in the party. The idea of stepping back can be critical. And that brings me to the second role, or the second position that a host leader can put themselves in, which is among the people. We're still very much present here. We're with our guests or among the people. We're with our team in a work environment, but we're no longer in the spotlight. It's no longer about us. This could take the form of mingling with our guests, identifying opportunities to make connections, joining in conversations, asking thought-provoking questions, sharing some observations, exposing our curiosity, and above all else, listening. We need to be careful because, like it or not, as a manager, if we are a manager, we have and will always have positional authority. So even when we're trying to be among the people, we need to be aware of this positional authority, because whether we like it or not, it exists and other people are aware of it. Now, there are things we can do to lessen that power gradient, but that's a topic for another day. If you're interested, there's a great book out there from David Marquette called Leadership as Language. Without going into too much detail, think about the time your leader last said, or if you're a leader, think about the last time you said, I don't know. That can be really powerful. It can open up a world of possibilities and a world of experts on your team to come up and fill the opportunity of what might be possible. But as a manager, it can be terrifying to say that. In workplaces, this can often be accomplished by small things, like getting out of the habit of having your team or your people bring status reports to you. Instead, as a host leader, maybe it makes sense for you to go to your team and see what's going on, where the work is actually happening. Imagine you're at a party. You wouldn't expect your guests to come to you and provide a status update every 15 minutes. Jeff, I'm here to report that in the last 15 minutes, 1/3 of the potato chips were eaten and 2/3 of the sausage rolls have been eaten, and the punch bowl is still 70% full. You wouldn't do that at a party. No, you'd go and see for yourself, and then you'd take action. For teams that are following one of the Agile frameworks, be it Scrum, Kanban, something else, you can be a leader among your people at things like your reviews. That's the time that a team is providing updates on their progress, showing what they've done. It also saves the team time because they don't have to create a separate status report for you. You'll get to see the update in real time as they're sharing it with their customers and stakeholders. As an added bonus, you'll actually get to observe the conversation that's happening between the team and their customers and stakeholders. What are people asking about? What questions are coming up? How are people responding? You'll also get an idea as to what the team is thinking about they're going to work on next. So these two positions, on the stage and among the people, are really about stepping forward or engaging with the party, engaging with the team. The next two positions are about stepping back. And the first one is on the balcony. In this position, we're no longer directly involved in the party. Now, think of the balcony as a balcony overlooking a giant Victorian courtyard. You're able to see everything that's going on. You can see the orchestra. You can see the dance floor. You can see the buffet and people milling about. You can see how people are flowing. We've intentionally shifted our perspective in a fundamental way to look creatively at the whole event rather than looking at it from being a part of it. It's from this vantage point in our workplaces that we can observe the whole team, the dynamics of what's going on, the interactions that are taking place, the groups that are forming and then reforming. We can see the connections that are happening between other teams, other departments, and other people in our company. And when we see that our guests can't get a cup of tea because the tea is on one side of the room and the cups, for some reason, are on the other side of the room, we can do something about that. And that's the same idea as when we see work regularly being blocked because of an environment issue. We can't get into the QA environment, or we can't get into the cert environment because there's environment problems. We see that from this vantage point. And it's our role as managers to do something about that. Maybe we can increase the stability or reliability of that environment. And we see that by taking a step back from the day-to-day work of the team. The other position that we have is called in the kitchen. Now, don't think of this explicitly of being in the kitchen of your home, but think about this being backstage, a place where we don't usually invite guests. We don't invite our team. This is time to reflect for yourself. This is where the planning and prep work happens. It's the time we spend away from our guests. We need to do both. It's important that we do both. But if we don't do any prep work, if we don't focus on creating an environment for our guests, we run the risk of continually working on the same thing in the same way. So we need to step back a little bit. We need to work on ourselves. We need to remember that the role of our host isn't to force our guests to have a good time. Our role is to create the environment for that, to plan for it. And we do that in the kitchen. And the same is true as a leader or manager. We're not here to force or coerce great things out of our teams. Instead, our goal is to create, nurture, and improve the environment and conditions so that great work can take place and great outcomes can be achieved by the amazing, talented, capable people on our teams. We need to spend time in the kitchen working on ourselves, working on our plans, working on creating that environment. We need to balance our time with ourselves and with our team. 4 positions on the stage where we're the center of attention. We're in the spotlight, perhaps kicking something off or leading a meeting or an event. We'll spend time among others with our teams, interacting with them, being a co-participant. Maybe we're in a training workshop with them, or maybe we just join our team for lunch. We want to observe the team and the interactions of what's going on in the organization. And we do that from a position of being on the balcony. And then we'll need to make sure that we're spending time on ourselves and working on creating the right environment. Excuse me, which we do in the kitchen. We often combine these 6 roles with the 4 positions. A couple of examples is a space creator, where we explain to the audience the purpose of a meeting. Sometimes we'll do it when we're a connector and we're working among the people. Based on our knowledge of an organization, we might suggest that one team talks to another team, because maybe they can help them solve a problem or help them reduce the amount of time it takes for a team to get something done. Another example would be a co-participant in the kitchen. When we're preparing our ideas or the arguments that we're going to make for tomorrow's meeting, or when we're working on something to get the next activity prepared in a workshop or an environment. We can combine these in many different ways. These are just a couple of really, really simple examples. Ultimately, we have 6 roles and 4 positions when we take on the role of host leader. We're the initiator, the inviter, the space creator, the gatekeeper, the connector, and the co-participant. And we have 4 positions. We do it on the stage, among others, on the balcony or in the kitchen. When you joined this session, 37 of you answered a poll that I put out there. Are you a leader at work? It's important for me it's important for us to remember that there's an opportunity for management to evolve how they manage. How do we evolve from our traditional industrial revolution Taylorism approaches of managing? Because we now work in a complex, volatile, uncertain, and ambiguous world. That is tied to complexity theory. Dave Snowden is here at this conference, and he introduced something called the Kneven framework. Most of our work fits in to that model, not in the domains that can be managed the way we traditionally have. Have a listen to him if you have the opportunity. But I feel there's an opportunity for all of us to make a positive impact. 30% of you said, yes, you are leaders in your organization. 30% of you said, sometimes you're a leader. 22% of you, 8 of you said, is this a trick question? And no, it's not really a trick question. I believe that all of us can be leaders. All of us can take on the role of hosts in different contexts and at different times. And sometimes it's being aware of that. It's not just about the managers in our organizations. It's about us as well. What role can we play? There's a lot more you can read about this. There's a few links in here. I'm sure this will be shared. A couple of great books. I also snuck in a few extra books. These books I didn't call out specifically, and they don't talk about host leadership, but I did introduce little elements from all 5 of these books as I was talking. If you want, you can go through, listen to the recording and see if you can find them. Or if not, they're just great books that I highly recommend on this. How did I do for timing? Do we have time for questions? Did I do it?
Yeah, sure. We always have time for questions.
Excellent.
All right. I guess at this point, Jeff, you can stop sharing so everyone can see us discussing. So actually, just before we go into questions, I wanted to say that one of those books that you shared today is written by Dave, and Dave is going to be speaking, I think, tomorrow. So if you're interested in Kinefin model, you better not miss out. I think he's speaking tomorrow. Yeah, he's opening the conference tomorrow. So you better not miss Dave's speech. I had a pleasure to watch him talking also a couple of years ago. But anyway, coming back to you and your topic. So 6 roles. Which of those 6 are closest to your heart? I know it's a very difficult question because you probably equally like all of them, but just be honest yourself. Which one?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really is context dependent. It's context specific. There are times that I've taken on all of those roles in various things. Perhaps the one that I get the most excited about, though, personally, is the idea of the connector. and that just comes from this insatiable curiosity I have. I am desperate to learn about other people, to talk to other people, to engage with other people. And learning about other people allows me to make connections when someone comes to me, or when I hear someone saying, I have a problem on something, and I'm able to make that connection. I get a tremendous amount of personal satisfaction about doing that. But all 6 roles at different times can be very rewarding. The connector, though, for me is by far the one that I most personally associate with.
All right, thank you very much. And one great way to learn new things, especially those things that you presented today, those roles and those, I don't know, approaches to how to execute those roles properly. So one way to do that is, of course, read books, go to conferences, listen to people talking about those things. But the other great way to learn is by watching the role model. Do you have any role model? Doesn't this have to be this connector role in particular, but do you have any role model people could follow that is a role model for you?
Yeah, I mentioned that Doc Norton, who, like I said, is speaking at this conference at the same time as I am, and for those of you that came to this one, thank you for coming to mine instead of Doc's. But Doc introduced me to this. I want to say in 2014, he introduced me to that, and rather than having a single role model, what it really did was open my eyes to being more explicit and more aware of the types of leaders in organizations. And I really started to observe how people were leading. And that really helped me identify, when I was working with a senior vice president, or when I was working with a director in an organization, or when I was working with the developer on a team, how were they interacting with others? And so rather than a single person, it just opened my eyes to being able to articulate and put words to what people did naturally, or what they didn't do naturally, as the case may be. So in some cases, when a leader, for example, would coerce people to follow their plan of action, I was able to connect that back to one of the roles that I was able to see in host leadership and say, hey, they're not being a good host, or they're not embodying those behaviors of a host. Most people that I interact with who give themselves the title of Agile Coach, or Scrum Master, or Product Owner, or developer, or tester, at some point embody some elements of these. And again, going back to that curiosity I have, the opportunity for me to observe, I don't have a single person that I can name. But you know what? I will name one person though, and that's Rich Sheridan. Rich Sheridan wrote a book called Joy Inc. He wrote another book 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, called Chief Joy Officer. And he made the decision implicitly about 10 years ago, maybe it was 11 years ago, to create an environment of joy at work. It was an unbelievable step that he took. And watching him, reading him, seeing how he interacts has been incredible for me. He's one of these role models that I do observe. I'm actually part of, sorry, shameless plug here, I'm part of the Agile Toronto group. And we actually have him speaking at our meetup this evening. And I'm really looking, he is amazing. But all leaders, all people, I think, embody some of these roles at different times and in different ways.